All right, if you've ever talked camshafts or looked at a camshaft card, you've been incredibly confused, and that's not your fault. I am actually convinced that the people that explain these things do it extremely in the most complicated way. This way it's almost like a soft gate, like, oh, you don't know anything about that, like, let the professionals handle it. So I'm going to break it down in a very easy, consumable way that even you understand generally what's going on with the camshaft. So, to the digital board of knowledge! Today we're basically going to be focusing on superchargers because I love forced induction, but we're also going to touch on like what you're going to be looking for out of a stock engine or a high performance engine. But it's more directed towards forced induction camshafts because that's where things get a little bit messy. Alright, so first things first, where do the camshaft numbers even come from? You have a couple of different keys here. You have duration, LSA, center line, valve alignment. All this stuff is measured in degrees. Now, you would think that they would measure off the camshaft degree. Well, unfortunately, you'd be wrong. They actually measure off the crankshaft degree. Now, here's where it gets extremely confusing. Like, I even struggled with this. Because you got to remember, a 4-stroke engine, you have 2 rotations of the crankshaft. So what that means is instead of the numbers being a total of 360 degrees, you actually have a total number of 720 degrees. And the camshaft spins at half that speed. So for every one time this goes around, the camshaft goes around a half of a time. Now this would be a dual overhead cam, but it's the same thing with a single cam. So when they're talking about duration or anything like that and they're spitting out numbers, they're talking about degrees that the crankshaft moves, not the camshafts. Now they use, even though it's extremely confusing, they use crankshaft degrees to keep everything in line, like spark timing and all of that, because then they can line all that stuff up. Alright, so now you might be asking about, what about top dead center and stuff like that? So top dead center is only important when you're degreeing out the cam. You've seen these wheels before. What they do is they take a special gauge that goes on the piston, they find the very top point on it, and they put on a degree wheel, and they can degree their cams in. Generally speaking, I mean, unless you're doing some really high performance shit, or you're advancing your cam, or delaying your cam, you don't have to worry about this. You just line up the timing marks and you're good to go. But that's the only time where top dead center means something. So when they're talking about like duration and stuff like that, that has nothing to do with top dead center. Those are those own measurements and they're taken in their own way, which I'll explain. So I just wanted to put that out there because that was something I was confused about. I'm like, so like, are we talking about like 120 degrees off top dead center or what's going on? And then, no, they're not. It's completely separate measurements. All right, so what are the 3 measurements that actually matter to you? Number 1 is duration. That's how long the valve stays open. Think of it like a door. The longer the duration, the longer the door is open. Then you got lift. How high or how far down does the valve go in inches? Now it's actually not the valve, it's the cam in inches, but ultimately that equates to the valve. There'll be some differences because the rocker arm will multiply that as well, but we're going to stick with cams for now. And then you got LSA, this is the big one. This is lobe separation. This is the personality of your cam. So first one, duration. How long does the valve stay open during the engine cycle? Duration starts at a measurement of 0.05 inches. I'll show you exactly what that means in a second. And that's a standard comparison. So when they talk about duration, that's when it's already lifted up 0.05 inches because I have to start somewhere. Like, where do you start on a cam? So that's like that's the line in the sand. That's where we're going to start measuring duration when the cam is actually open at 0.05 inches. Smaller, you're going to be looking at better torque and low end power. A bigger duration, you're going to be looking at top end or high end horsepower RPMs. So when you think duration, smaller, low end, bigger, high end. Did I miss a slide here? Yeah. All right, so this is what we're talking about duration. What they do is they start measuring at 0.05 inches because where else are you going to start? Are you going to start here? You're going to start here, here, here. You have to pick a starting point, and that's what they went with because otherwise, you know, where do you start? So once the lifter lifts up 0.05 inches, that's where they start measuring the duration, and it's the amount of time the valve is open. So here's an example. This would be the duration. It would start here on this one, end here. On this particular cam, it would start here, and here I'm just picking hypothetical points, but I wanted to have something where you can see the difference. Now this diagram isn't showing that, but we're using that as a step in, okay? So pretend these are two different cams right next to each other. Start. You can see that this would definitely have a bigger duration because the cam would be open longer. Again, it starts at 0.05 inches, not from the seat. Sometimes people talk about it from the seat to make their duration numbers look better, but the industry standard is 0.05 inches, so that's where you want to be looking at when you're talking about comparing the two durations. So how long is it started at 0.05 inches till it closes below 0.05 inches? That's what your duration number tells you. Example, intake 2.24, exhaust 230. So remember, this is the crankshaft. So this would be 180 would be a half of a turn. This would be almost a full crankshaft turn. 360 would be a full crankshaft turn, so it's not a full crankshaft turn, but that's a general idea of it. Remember, 180 is a half, 360 is a full turn, and it's got to make 2 turns in order for the camshaft to turn once. All right, so a short duration would be from 210 to 225. This is going to be very street friendly. You're going to have great low end power. You're going to have a great idle. It's going to pull a nice vacuum. It's going to be pretty awesome. Now, a big duration is when the exhaust and the intake typically go above 235. You know, every engine's an individual, but that's typically a rule of thumb. This will be your race engines. It's going to have a very choppy idle. It's not going to pull a good vacuum. But you're going to have excellent top end power. With boost, you usually run a conservative duration because you don't want the exhaust and the boost pressure, or the boost pressure to flow out the exhaust. Now, duration doesn't directly tell you that. That's LSA, but typically the duration is a key part in that. But LSA is where it really comes in with boost. But typically, like I said, with naturally aspirated, you don't run that big of a duration. Valves are open and closed really quick because everything's pressure fed. Everything's happening real quickly. You don't need it open really long like you do with a naturally aspirated engine. So LSA, this is the big one. This is lobe separation angle. The difference between when the exhaust is open and when the intake is open. That's the center line of the two peaks. So essentially, I'll show you in the diagrams later, a wide separation would be 114 to 120. Not a whole lot of overlap there. A narrow one, that would be 108 to 112. That would be a lot of overlap. This wouldn't be ideal for boost because the boost would be flowing right into the intake and right back out the exhaust. Overlap is the time where both valves are open. And again, overlap is kind of its own measurement, but you don't need to really know overlap. You just need to know LSA. How far apart are the valves? All right, so alone, like I said, it does not tell you overlap, but it gives you a pretty good idea. These numbers are pretty standard. You hear those numbers and you pretty much know what to go. Because if you want to get really complicated, you take the duration, and then the LSA, and then the valve overlap, and you compute all that together when really the LSA pretty much already tells you what you need to know anyways. Now, if you're building a custom grind or you're on a lathe turning out camshafts, yeah, you have to know all those numbers, but as a consumer, you don't. Too much overlap on boost, like I said, waste boost, it goes right out the exhaust, gives you a poor spool, you don't get a whole lot of power. The camshaft makes a huge difference. When I had the Jimmy and I went from just a standard Edelbrock RPM, or Performer RPM, to an actual comp cam made for boost, I was pulling, I think, an extra 2 pounds on my boost gauge because it makes that much of a difference because I'm not just wasting the boost out the exhaust. So, what does the LSA look like in real life? We are looking at the point from here to here, the peaks or the nose of the two cam lobes. How far apart are they? Now, like I said, they don't directly tell you overlap, but it's enough information as a consumer to where you can judge what type of overlap it's going to be. From there to there, so as you see, if you move it in, now the two valves are overlapping more. From here, they're farther apart, so there's not a whole lot of overlap. Wide, narrow. And this is what it would look like as the cam itself. Again, as you pull these in together, now both of them are open at the exact same time, and that's where you're going to get your scavenging, and this matters a lot with naturally aspirated. Again, with boosted engines, you typically don't want a lot of overlap because otherwise, at this point, your boost is coming into the intake and right out the exhaust. Lift. This is how far the valve moves off of the seat. Now they're measuring it from the camshaft. They're not actually measuring the valve because again, your rocker arm and stuff like that, that's going to change the formula. So they're only counting basically how far the lifter moves up and down. At the highest point, all the way to the narrowest point. Generally speaking, more lift is better, but your head flow matters. Your port design matters. Valve size matters. Piston to valve clearance matters. If you don't have a good valve train and you don't have a whole bunch of flow, what you're going to do is create a bunch of turbulence if you have too much lift. Think of it like your thumb over a garden hose, right? Now this is a poor explanation, but this is the way to be able to quantify it. So finger off the garden hose is just flowing out. There's not a lot going on in there. Well, you squeeze it just a little bit, and now you have it coming in with pressure. And that's what you're looking for, is the stuff to just come in with pressure. Again, too much lift, like your heads and your cam are one with each other. That kind of came off a little bit weird, but that's the best way to look at it. Like your cam is limited by what your head can actually do. Your returns, they diminish very quickly, and it starts to go negative once you exceed your head's performance. So where's the lift measured from? This is just the easiest way to quantify it. This isn't exactly correct, but the base of the lobe to the nose of the lobe. Right there. This is the actual measurement that we're talking about. So here's the nose, here's the base cylinder. They can take the measure from anywhere here. How tall does it go? And that's what we're looking for. All right, so let's look at a typical stock engine to give you a good idea of a baseline before we start talking about the boost. So duration, again, remember this starts measuring at 0.05 inches. Your typical spread, now on an actual cam sheet, it's going to have intake and exhaust, so this might get a little confusing. I should have wrote it differently. But this is talking about the spread. Your intake and exhaust is typically going to be between 200 and 215 degrees. Now again, this isn't like 200 for intake, 215 for exhaust. This is the spread you should see. For lift, typically on a stock engine like an LS or something like that, you're going to see between like 0.45 to 0.50. That's a general lift you're going to see. And for LSA or valve separation, you're going to see about 114 to 116. This is your stock cams. This is just a rough general idea of what you're going to see for stocks. It's not really good for boost, but it's going to have a great idle. It's going to be great stoplight to stoplight. So let's get into some of this forced induction stuff. The first one we're going to talk about is Prochargers or Centrifugal. I pronounce it wrong. Look, I'm just going to go with Centrifugal because that rolls off the tongue. I understand it is pronounced differently, but just to keep the flow of the video going, we're going to pronounce it like that. So Prochargers, you build boost with RPM. So you're going to have a weak low end and you're going to have a very strong top end. So what is the goal of the camshaft? The camshaft is going to be to get a good low to medium torque low before the boost comes in, because that's where you need the aid. Once the boost comes in, well, now you're cruising. Now you got horsepower out the ass. You're good to go. But getting to that point is where you want your camshaft to really kick in. So recommended traits is a moderate duration focused on low end range. Easier intake event. LSA around 114 to 117. A good balance between lift and top end power. Next one, we got turbochargers. So this uses the exhaust energy to spool the turbo. Too much overlap kills your spool, so you don't want a whole bunch of overlap here, especially because then it might start flowing backwards. Not good at all. So you want a very short exhaust duration. Less overlap than blower cams. Often more intake duration to get that boost in there, but then just a quick exhaust. Your typical overlap, or your LSA, is going to be 112 to 118. Now you could custom tune it depending on the blower and all of that, or the turbocharger and all that, and they range dramatically in sizes. Again, you're going to be talking to the cam manufacturer, telling them your setup, and then they're going to recommend a specific cam. Root style blowers, or the ones we like, Whipples, Eden, all those ones. All right, so what you're going to be looking for is you get instant boost out of low RPMs. So that's really good. Like, that's awesome. Big risk here is blowing boost out the exhaust during overlap. So you want to really narrow that overlap or the LSA because you don't want your boost to come into the intake and right back out the exhaust. So you're looking for a mild overlap. LSA, you don't really want to go wider than 118 to 120 plus. Keep those valves very far apart. I should have said, you want to go over 118, you want to be at like 120 plus, keep those valves very far apart to get rid of a lot of that overlap so you don't waste it. Now, the plus side on this is your engine's going to run really smooth. It's not like a naturally aspirated engine where you throw a big cam in there and it's like, gah, 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 gah. Now you're separating the valves, so it's going to run stoplight to stoplight really, really good. It's going to idle great. It's going to pull plenty of vacuum. And that's awesome because that's where you're going to get the most performance out of it. So, very short duration on the blowers. So as you can see, like different camshafts, they give your engines different personalities. And if you pick a good camshaft, you're going to have a great personality in your engine. We're going to talk to the manufacturers and be like, hey, this is my setup. What cam should I be running? We're only learning this information just so we kind of know what we're talking about. This isn't to teach you how to like go on a lathe and cut your own grind. This is teaching you what questions do I need to ask if I'm purchasing a camshaft. Where should I be looking? Do I just want to go to Alderock and get the Performer RPM? Do I want to just go to ComCam, or do I want to call the manufacturer and be like, hey, I'm running a turbocharger, it's going to push this much boost, and it's going to be on this displacement of an engine. What camshaft do I need? That's the proper way to go. But you got to understand the questions first, and that's the whole point of this video. Anyways, I appreciate you guys watching my video. If you'd like to help support the channel, click on that Amazon affiliate link. Even if you don't buy what that link is for, just clicking on it. Doing the Amazon shopping you were already going to do anyway, I'll kick back for it because you came there off my channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.